Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'd like to first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're presenting from today, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and their elders past, present, and future. We want to thank them for their care and custodianship of this land and its waters that kept it healthy for us to use today. My name's Ineke Dane. I'm Senior Curator here at UAP in Meanjin, Brisbane. I hope you're all having a really great culmination to the year.
Thanks, Ineke, for that warm welcome. And thanks everyone for joining us to UAP's Best Public Art 2021, working in collaboration with our media partner, Artsy. I'm Natasha Smith, Curatorial Director at UAP, and I'd like to extend my gratitude to you all for tuning in today from all around the world, whether it's day or night. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening, and we hope that we bring you some inspo to your day or your night. I'd also like to say an enormous thank you to our incredible international contributing curators. A quick glimpse of them there. We've got Matthew Israel, we've got Paul Farber, Kirsten Lacy, Yang Zi, Sarah Collicott, and of course, Ineke and myself. Just a little housekeeping. Ineke and I are going to go through this presentation. We've got lots of great images, interesting anecdotes, a bit of a discussion around the projects and why each of these wonderful curators have nominated these works. We'll be stepping through in no particular order of curator or work, but we'll introduce each curator and their nominations subsequently. If you have any questions, do pop it in the chat, but please note that we will wait till the end to answer those questions. And if we miss anyone's question, we will follow up on email because we really, really appreciate your time in taking the energy to ask us about the info. So without further ado, we're going to dive on in today to the Best of Public Art 2021. Our first curator is Kirsten Lacy. Let me introduce you to her. She's the director at the Auckland Art Gallery Toi o Tāmaki. Kirsten has a master's degree in art history and curatorship, and she previously held the director role with Shepparton Art Gallery and was deputy director at the National Gallery of Australia prior to taking up the reins in Auckland. I actually met up with Kirsten with a colleague on her first day in Auckland. She was very excited, and this was a few years ago, and I think it's wonderful to see everything that she's achieved at the gallery. She's chosen 2 nominations, which Ineke and I will introduce to you. And I just want to note that she's chosen them actually both from the gallery. And this was for 2 kind of reasons. One, she really felt they were phenomenal works in the kind of context of the year globally. But the other was that she spoke to me about how she was able to physically experience these works herself. And I think that's a really interesting note, you know, as we are living through this COVID pandemic and the limitations that we're still facing. So diving in, Kirsten's first nomination is by the wonderful New Zealand Māori artist, Ruben Patterson. The work is entitled Guide Kairahi, and it's an incredible 10-metre waka, which is a Māori war canoe, and it stands on end outside the Auckland Art Gallery. The work was commissioned by the Edmiston Trust and the Auckland Art Gallery in partnership. And it's a semi-permanent commission. It's standing for approximately 5 years in this location. It's sited right in the public forecourt, totally open to public access, and stands in this beautiful reflection pool. Patterson, if you know his work or don't know his work, is best known for the use of glitter and sequin-encrusted paintings and sculptures. He has this kind of proficiency with harnessing the appeal of light, its reflectivity and its visual articulation, as you can see in this work. He draws from both his Māori and his Scottish ancestry, and he combines traditional patterns and designs with non-traditional media and reinvigorates and extends Māori expression. Guide Kairahi takes inspiration from the sighting of a phantom waka at the very foot of Mount Tarawera on Lake Tarawera 11 days prior to a massive volcanic eruption which took place a long time ago in June 1886. The Māori community felt that the eruption was the god Atuate Tamahoe, who had been buried with Mount Tarawera underneath the mountain, expressing total rage at a lack of traditional tapu, which is religious customs, and perceiving that the land had been taken for granted. I just think this is so poignant, this conversation that Ruben's having. It's so multi-layered, of course, but, in one thread, you can pick up this kind of conversation between history, between culture and the present day. And, we very much are living at a time where we're taking our land for granted. A hot fact, we love a hot fact, is that this work is quite literally a chandelier. And Ruben would very proudly let you know that it's made with 595 cut glass crystals. I just have to say I was a bit riveted that Kirsten Lacy put this piece forward. It's very, very close to my heart. I had the great honour to work very closely with Ruben and all of our amazing team at UAP as we had the honour of actually fabricating this work. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, it was actually such a treat and a pleasure to have it. You can't see where we are just now, but we're hovering above the UAP workshop, and it was with us for months, and it was so lovely as we took people around to be able to explain the work. And we missed it, I think, actually, when I went across the ditch. But there's something really, really mesmerizing about Ruben's practice, and this waka is no less. It's completely arresting in kind of scale, materiality, and its sighting. Interestingly, that reflection pool that you can see there is actually a symbolic reminder of the waters that run beneath the ground near the gallery. And there was a very conscious and sensitive and considered placement of the work in this pool. And as Natasha mentioned, it's oriented kind of vertically in an unexpected way rather than horizontally in a more practical way. And that links the realms of kind of heaven and earth and inserts this esoterical spiritualness and myth into our kind of hard fact-driven world, particularly in cities where the gallery is. And there's this lingering question, will it inspire a willingness to enter uncharted territories? And in that way, the artist is really encouraging a bravery and an embracing of the unknown. And drawing from this legend of the phantom or ghost walker, it's a real feat to materialize or render in permanence this kind of ephemerality that Ruben's trying to capture. And that's where the choice of materials and design come in so strongly. They really operate in a way that bend and give visibility to this otherwise invisibility of light, as you can see by the shadows thrown there. And Ruben and the workshop team very, very consciously chose and worked with materials that create this dialogue with light and water and shadow. The work really considers and dances with its home there on the pool, and this beautiful liminality, I think, kind of by the intersections of all these elements.
Yeah, it really embodies the environment in a very expansive way, doesn't it?
So Kirsten's next nomination, we're staying in Aotearoa in Auckland. And this is a 2021 iteration of Ugo Rondinone's Vocabulary of Solitude. And this is a series that he began in 2014, so maybe quite familiar to everyone. The most public-facing part of the commission, as you can see here, next to Ruben's waka, is the rainbow window colour treatments. And they're very, very visible from the external of the building. They're almost like a lure into the gallery's northern atrium, where this arresting community of 45 lifelike clowns kind of lounge and sit. They're relaxed but pensive, and while they're together, there's this kind of censoring, lingering aloneness, I think. This work was commissioned for the reopening of the gallery post-COVID lockdowns. And that for that very specific occasion. So it really marks a point in time, this sort of collective re-welcoming and in a way a collective mourning, in a sense, kind of an acknowledgement of all that's been over the past 20 months or so. And there's this kind of strange alchemy of ennui and melancholy in the work that gives us permission to feel and feel emotions other than the coveted happiness. We don't have to go around pretending that everything's okay. This work gives us permission to feel something other. And Kirsten captures it by saying there's a clown for almost every emotion we've felt during the COVID era: loneliness, boredom, deflation, introspection, exhaustion, and wonder. She notes that Rondinone speaks particularly to the moment we find ourselves in. And I think that's so achingly captured in this work's title, vocabulary of solitude, because we actually don't have the words. This sweeping installation kind of captures emotionally what words cannot, because this pandemic time, as I don't need to say it, has kind of been the opposite of ineffable for many people.
Absolutely. I'm just going to pick up, there was a tiny little question in the chat, and I just thought I'd say, yes, the waka is sited outside of the gallery, and Ugo's work, as you could see there when we were going through the slides, includes a kind of outward facing aspect, but then also has this internal aspect, which is fully publicly accessible as well and free when the gallery is open. I think it's really exciting to see an institution, in this case, Auckland Art Gallery Toi or Tāmaki, embracing their public exterior in such a bold way and extending the gallery experience beyond the walls. And I think, you don't even have to step foot to get an awful lot, particularly from the waka, of course, it's fully outside, but even from Ugo's work, to get a lot of the work's experience. I think that's really exciting. And no doubt that kind of generosity and that generous approach actually brings people across the threshold and encourages visitation. And I think also, Auckland Art Gallery is case in point. It's experienced many lockdowns through this year in particular. And so it's a great way to still get impact with visitors. Passers-by can still experience these works even when the gallery is closed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful signal in a way that the gallery is reopened. That brings us to our next contributing creative, Matthew Israel, who is a writer, art historian, and a curator. And he's just this week begun a really exciting new role as commissions lead at Open Arts at Meta. And Meta is a forward-thinking company whose vision is to help bring the metaverse to life. Admittedly, I had to check myself and look up metaverse. So for those like me who didn't 100% carry the definition, it sounds familiar, but then I thought, when I try and explain this, can I? So the metaverse is a hypothesized iteration of the internet, supporting online 3D virtual environments through VR and AR headsets, or a virtual world that lies beyond or on top of the physical world. So Matthew's really interested in pushing into this space. He's guided by forward-thinking digital initiatives, data-informed decision-making, long-view strategic planning, and the nuanced connections between the art world and the wider world. And this takes us to Matthew's first nomination, whose creators really defied for decades any categorization and who were tenacious with their planning. This particular project was actually first conceived in the early 1960s, so I won't say too much.
Of course, Matthew Israel's first nomination is probably highly recognizable to everyone listening in L'Arc de Triomphe, which was wrapped in Paris this year by the Christo and Jeanne-Claude Foundation. The work was on exhibition from September to October this year, and it was created in partnership with, of course, L'Arc de Triomphe and the City of Paris, and funded by the estate of Christo and the support of the Centre Pompidou. Some hot facts for your day when you look at this one all night is that it incorporates over 25,000 meters, which I'm glad to say are recyclable meters of fabric. 3,000 meters of red rope was also used to then secure that fabric, as you see. And the public were actually allowed kind of complete pedestrian access up to the arc, which I think is really gorgeous. And you'll see that interaction in some of the images. Matthew Israel states that this was arguably 2021's most important visible piece of public art. It attracted worldwide media attention and reportedly 6 million viewers on the ground in Paris. Amazing. I mean, living in Australia where we kind of are pretty locked down still in many ways, it's quite phenomenal to imagine that kind of number of people engaging with something. And I think it's an incredible achievement in COVID.
Like a third of the population of Australia.
Indeed.
Or I don't know, a quarter, but it's pretty phenomenal when you think about it.
Matthew says that the work was captivating for several reasons. To name a few, it was an incredibly ambitious piece, of course, and by one of the world's best known creatives. It also had this great storyline, as Ineke alluded to. It was envisaged by the artist since 1961, and Christo had passed away very sadly the year before, but he approved the work to be executed posthumously. Israel also goes on to say, which I think is really quite thought-provoking, what's often lost in the discussion of Christo's work is that what they might mean, and this continued with the attention paid to the wrapped arc. It's instructive to ponder what this work might be suggesting, especially in our present moment. Over the course of their career, Christo and Jeanne-Claude cited a few motivations for wrapping objects, such as depriving everyday objects of their function, preserving them for posterity, and proposing them as art. A case in point is what Christo said in 1985 about his wrapping of the Pont Neuf in Paris. He explained, "I wanted to transform it, to turn it from an architectural object, an object of inspiration for artists, to an art object, period." As such, we might ask ourselves, what does it mean to propose something as an art object today, 36 years after that project? Furthermore, what does it mean to take one of the grandest monuments to those who died in wartime and to cover it up?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting also that Matthew, who's pushing into this virtual space, has chosen something that's so solid and kind of real in a way. And that bridge in time is very interesting. So Christo first created a sketch of L'Arc de Triomphe 60 years ago. And it's kind of incredible that for all our invention and expansion into virtual territory, something so solid and physical can equally be so achingly kind of surreal at the same time, and really blurs the boundary, I think, between the real and the surreal. And perhaps in a similar way to the virtual world, though, take us into another realm that incites risk and imagination to dare. And from, archive letters and documents I've read on the couple, Christo and Jeanne-Claude, I know they shared a tenacity and a determinedness that knew absolutely no boundaries. And that's the kind of determination that you need to realize their projects. And I mean, this is a true spectacle in the full definition of that word, that distracted not just Parisians, but the world, I think, and really jolted us from the present condition. For some reason, it makes me think of Philippe Petit's wire walk in the 70s, existing for the sake of that magical moment and no other reason. And I'm sure we could wax lyrical on this project indefinitely. This idea of turning a heavy war monument into a sculpture-like form with weightlessness, kind of like a beacon of peace all of a sudden, is really, really beautiful gesture. That leads us to Matthew's second nomination. We're pivoting to Wangechi Mutu's work at the San Francisco's Legion of Honor Museum, specifically 4 major bronze sculptures at the forecourt that led into her museum-wide exhibition titled "I Am Speaking, Are You Listening?" I remember years ago an exhibition at the MCA in Sydney that introduced me to Wangechi's practice, and I returned 4 times, dragging different people along each time, actually. And I think her work really compels you to return like that, because she creates these visceral and fantastical landscapes that breed new mythologies with powerful female characters, and they require multiple visits to navigate the different layers that she kind of weaves and complexly embeds within. I'm obsessed a little bit with the works in this particular image, Mama Ray to the right, and Crocodilus, in which Mutu breaches the distinctions between human, animal, plant, and machine. And I think Mama Ray in particular is kind of supremely elegant, and the stone beneath her could equally be an ocean. Such is the movement of her body. I think she really heralds the exact figure young women and children and people all over are craving as this new goddess. She's fierce, calm, intelligent, and agile, kind of ready to take on all the political climates and rapidly changing environments of the future. She's completely antithetical, I think, to the fleshiness and succumbness of Rodin's The Thinker, which you can see on the screen there at the top left, hunched and bent over, because now's not the time really for sitting and pondering. I think it's the time for movement. And it's almost like Mutu's figures aren't even in dialogue with the thinker at all. They're kind of beyond it. They're not even looking at him, as you can see there, because they've got better things to do than challenge it.
Nicely put. I think a key trend that we're going to see for this year is this kind of unpacking and this inviting of consideration of topics around art history, accepted history, truth-telling, even challenging and, kind of like a rewriting of the canon, so to speak, and considering cultural symbols, mythologies, and Eurocentric cultural icons. Rodin's Thinker, encircled by Mutu's gorgeous sculptural bronzes, certainly asks the viewer to think on the matter. And I think you're going to see this pick up in a lot of the works that we talk to today.
That's exactly right. And this brings us to our next lovely contributor, Paul Farber, director and co-founder of Monument Lab, a nonprofit public art and history studio in Philadelphia. And Paul's research and curatorial projects explored transnational urban history, cultural memory, and creative approaches to civic engagement. And I think this is completely and utterly evident in the projects he's called out for 2021.
So first we have Paul's initial nomination, which is the artwork by Suzanne Brennan Firstenberg. And this is entitled In America. Remember is actually kind of like a subtext to that heading. And it was installed at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. from September to October this year. And it's worth noting that this is a restaging of an earlier artwork a year prior, which was presented at a much smaller scale, adjacent to the Arlington National Cemetery. This year's iteration was realised in collaboration with the National Mall and the National Park Service, and with, I think, considerable in-kind support from Rupert Landscape, consisting of nearly 700,000 white flags commemorating people in America who passed away due to COVID-19 to date, or to the date of the exhibition. The work really visualizes the immense human loss experienced in the United States because of the rampant spread of the virus and subsequent handling of the pandemic. The flags visualize the deaths, and they explain the impact perhaps more tangibly than data can. Suzanne hopes that in 2021, with the visual reference, people will be stirred in her community to take vaccines now and to stem the continuous losses from the virus. Visitors to the site are also invited to write messages to a loved one. And I think, this is a really beautiful kind of opportunity for grief communally. The installation, as you can see in that expansive shot there, stretches nearly 6 kilometres, which is enormous. And it has beautiful kind of benches and landscaped areas considered throughout to allow people to pause and engage. Some hot facts: it took 150 landscapers 3 days to put it together. And I think this is a really lovely, poignant note. It's the largest participatory public art installation at the National Mall since the AIDS Memorial Quilt was displayed in 1996. Big moment in history. Paul describes this work firsthand from when he visited with a group of students from a nearby School of Arts, and he describes the experience in a really evocative manner. So I'm just going to read this to you. We approached the installation from ground level. We stopped to listen to the sound of the breeze working its way through the sea of flags, flapping and clamoring, hearkening and haunting. We eventually split up as my students moved through the massive installation, and we lost one another for minutes at a time, snagged by the handwritten note on a particular flag, ruminated on another viewer's reaction, or swept up in the entirety of the project and the pandemic. We gathered to pause and take in what we went through together. There we could feel the rush and release of grief and glimpsed a prospect of accountability.
Yeah, and I don't think it's quite captured in the images we've just run through, but I read a little side note that there was a little pocket of flags that represented the deaths in Aotearoa, New Zealand, just for a comparison for people to show, like, you know, if you had stopped or locked down earlier, the reduced deaths that could have, you know, been achieved through that kind of measure. But it's such a sweeping gesture, this work, and it's almost like Suzanne turned the pandemic on its head. It's quite simple, but it's genius at the same time. And, you know, because of this period of extended solitude and separation, grappling with this unknown and uncertainty daily and this kind of invisible threat, here is a vast, highly visible ocean, allowing or kind of giving permission for collective grief altogether, not apart or hidden behind doors. And I think the symbolic gesture of these flags and further the invitation for people to write personal messages on them is extremely generous and intuitive on behalf of the artist. And it just shows she knows, you know, the cathartic effect of expression and sharing. And just finally, I think the work demonstrates that ephemeral, immediate interventions using simple everyday items can be just as powerful as highly curated long-term works hewn of rock-solid materials. So kind of maybe an equally somber but nonetheless evocative work is Mothers of Gynecology, Paul's second nomination. And while in this case the work is definitely more permanent and monument-like, it has a lot of parallels with Suzanne's work in its resourceful materiality. And the work was fashioned by the artist Michelle Browder with collected common medical objects, including discarded medical tools and surgical implements. Browder's nous, I think, is formidable. She consulted metal artists and took up welding herself to create the work over several years at the back of an old warehouse that later became her studio. And I think that's testament to the adage, where there's a will, there's a way. Paul says Browder's monument stands as a new beacon of truth-telling and historical acknowledgement. The 15-foot tall metal ensemble sculpture honors three Black women, Ineke, Betsy, and Lucy, who were enslaved and brutally experimented upon without consent by Dr. Marion Sims, dubbed the father of gynecology. And you can see Michelle's had a play on that in the work's title, despite his horrific and inhumane practices. The work is very pointedly cited in Montgomery, where Sims conducted his experiments. And I think even if you had read nothing and had no background information at once, you realize the figures are telling a really sinister and suppressed tale. These kind of rudimentary raw materials are echoing not only the instruments, no doubt used on the women, but harking to the pain they would have felt throughout the procedures, which reportedly were done without anesthetic at all. At the same time, all of that said, Browder has managed to capture a softness and womanliness through the eclectic amalgamation of materials and metals, and this kind of overrides the objectification and slavery of the women with a dignity and a pride. And I just wanted to finish by saying the work is still extremely relevant today in the context of reproductive justice and abortion rights across America and many parts of the world, really, where in America, the legal protection of Roe versus Wade is hanging literally as we speak by a thread. And that Roe versus Wade obviously encapsulates the rights for women to terminate their pregnancy.
I think this work's such an interesting combination of being quite humble, like we've said, in form, material scale, but incredibly profound with great gravitas. To tell this history is so important and evidently long overdue. Again, we see truth-telling and untold histories as a key theme coming through the works. I think it's very brave and very beautiful. And I have great thanks to give to Michelle Browder for raising awareness and giving energy to the memory of these women. And we'll move from quite a somber selection, perhaps to something a little more uplifting as well. Our next contributing curator is Sarah Collicott. I'd like to introduce you to Sarah. She's a highly experienced curator and art historian. In 2001, she co-founded a leading public art agency before setting up her own company, Artscape Management, with a focus on the Middle East and supporting the practice of emerging artists in that region. After moving to Saudi Arabia as development director for public art for one of the nation's giga projects, Sarah is now setting up a new department as director of arts for Saudi-based company Constantine. Sarah is well known for facilitating the delivery and sponsorship by Adobe of the Heather Phillipson's Fourth Plinth Commission, The End in Trafalgar Square, London, and a lot of her work has focused on cultural placemaking and the commissioning of artwork generated through research into historical and contemporary context to celebrate unique qualities of place. Sarah is obviously highly skilled in the space of public art curation. Sarah's first nomination is by Saudi female artist Lulwah al-Homoud. This work was commissioned as part of the annual Noor Festival in Riyadh, Festival of Art, and Noor means light in Arabic. And this was on show from March until June this year. The work was commissioned by the Royal Commission for Riyadh City in partnership with the King Abdullah Financial District Conference Centre. The work was fully open to the public and free, and as you can see, indoors based on the light medium. The infinite blue responds to the festival's theme, Under One Sky, and the work explores tension between the infinite and the finite and imagines expansive possibility and extensions of space beyond the tangible. The digital artwork is staged over one large immersive screen, which projects out a deep blue color into the exhibition space, as you can see. The shade of blue employed by Lulwah draws inspiration from the color of the sky as it shifts between night and day, and which is also often synonymous with sunrise and sunset and Muslim prayer time. To create each of the images, Lulwah has devised a sequence of codes which reinterpret Arabic lettering, with each new interpretation becoming an elaborate motif which works to explicate varying names of God in Arabic. A hot fact for you is 300,000 people attended the festival in Riyadh, which is very exciting as art festivals are a fairly new phenomena in the region. Sarah states of the work that many of al-Homoud's artworks use this specific blue color, which the artist notes is that tone visible in the sky at sunset and prayer time and sunrise, and tells us that the earth is rotating to the sun again and is perhaps symbolic of hope in these challenging times and a celebration of light over dark. For Sarah, it seems to trigger personal inner responses which are all positive. And the public art installation in her mind epitomizes al-Homoud's artistic practice being timeless, fundamental, and ubiquitous. I just think it's such an interesting trend that we're seeing hope coming through as a strong message again.
It's really uplifting, I think. And in Homoud's work, I'm really caught on this idea of using this kind of specific blue that's a tone visible in the sky at sunrise and sunset prayer times, telling us or reminding us that the earth is rotating to the sun again. And I just wonder if this kind of work might have the ability to reorient us in cities without a call to prayer. I know personally, the days go by sometimes and I barely realize the sun has come up or down, but we're just so caught up in everything else that we're doing, we forget we're living on this kind of spinning ball that flies through the universe, which is mildly absurd. Al-Homoud is one of the few women to practice abstract art in Saudi Arabia. And I think there's a really quiet kind of intelligence that permeates her practice. The mathematical layer combined with religion, calligraphy, Islamic philosophy, and traditional Islamic patterns, all capturing in a kind of kaleidoscopic way the tension between the rational and the inexplicable and the finite and the infinite, and to posit that in a highly religious kind of country or state or kingdom is in its own way quite provocative. And this kind of notion that abstract art transcends all boundaries is quite particularly powerful in the context of displaying work in a region where the figurative is prohibited entirely. So finding other ways to talk about these themes. That will...
Sorry, I had a slight lag on my slides there. A little rush of blue on your screen.
A mind cleanse. So Sarah's next project that she felt resonated really strongly in 2021 was Circa by multiple artists. And this one is also digital and screen-based, this time in London's Piccadilly Lights. And this is ordinarily a commercial billboard. I think interesting in itself, the kind of occupation and intervention of art in that space. And the work is essentially a series of responses to a central question: where do we go from now? In response to the current collective states of emergency encompassing climate change, the global pandemic, racism, sexism, freedom, and equality. So it's quite an ambitious work in that way, and the subjects it was trying to tackle and called responses to. And while it was part curated with invited artists and thinkers such as Ai Weiwei, who you can see on the screen there, and Marina Abramovich and Patti Smith, and anyone at all at the same time could contribute via a website that invited submissions and reactions and projected at the same time each day. And in this way, there was kind of this element of democracy in the work. During COP26, that's the 26th conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you can see why it's abbreviated, in Glasgow in October this year. The screens were lit up each evening with videos by different people responding to the negotiations in kind of real time. And I think in that way, the project created a public forum that maybe alleviated a sense of helplessness in the face of powerful state-led meetings where the decisions of a very select few affect many and the masses.
And it's great to see a work in this lineup championing that conversation. Aside from this obviously being very compelling and consisting of some quite incredible artists, very high profile artists, I think what I liked about it was the interactive layer that you spoke to, where people could submit, and that was quite curated. And I like that kind of engagement. I think it's really exciting to see an interactive work that's kind of a slow burn. It's not an instantaneous reward. And I like the pace of that. So people could submit their reactions, and there was a possibility that their kind of submission would be aired at this particular time each day. So I think there's an excitement in that and a kind of slow burn, which is really great to see as an engagement layer.
Reminded me a tiny bit of John Baldessari, Your Naming Lights as well, where with that kind of interaction and digital screen and looking out for your submission or thank you. So last but not least, Of our contributors is Yang Zi. Yang is formerly curator and head of public programs at UCCA Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing. And he's currently an independent curator who recently won the inaugural SIG Fellowship for Chinese Art Research, quite prestigious.
So Yang Zi's first nomination is by artist Zhou Bandi, and this is Panda Garden Life on Clouds, exhibited in Shanghai. This work was commissioned by Fosun Foundation in Shanghai and was displayed this year. Bandi frequently employs the panda as a recurring motif throughout his practice. And the panda, which is, of course, synonymous with Chinese culture, in Zhou's work becomes a tool for commentary on China's social and political landscape. A very accessible and engaging tool. I think you see a very cute panda there. Working across installation, performance, and photography, the artist includes the panda in what appears as a playful subversion and interruption of the norms, but speaks more to serious ideas around authority, censorship, and subversion. Sorry, subservience. I apologize.
Long day and
tongue twister for the morning.
So I think, this is a tool commonly used by contemporary Chinese artists, the use of kind of like a fun or pop or childlike decoy to talk about more serious and political matters like suppression and freedom of speech. And I just can't help kind of comparing to, for example, the very transparent nature of the themes and narrative in Mothers of Gynecology. I just think it's interesting to kind of remember in our highly globalized world, the sheer cultural and political differences that still exist between us all, despite kind of homogenization in other ways. So I think Yang Zi's second pick for 2021 is recognized by us all, but I personally would never tire of seeing it punctuate the sky. It's Isa Genskin's Rose, inspiring contemplation around what is natural and what is fake in a world where mass production is the status quo. And kind of further provoking a connection to issues of sustainability. Lots of layers of themes in this work, but Rose can also be seen as a monumental poem in form. And Z beautifully captured that the giant rose, which once stood in New York and Paris, blooms now in Hong Kong, responding in equal measure to the skyscraper-lined cityscape and the city's need for kitschy spectacle. This time, more locally, it seems to be a romantic gesture that patches up the torn social sentiments and rebuilds a trustful relationship with each other. By virtue of its timing and location, the dual functions of art, both soothing and provocative at once, are embedded in this sculpture despite the simplicity of its form.
Yes, the rose, thorns and beauty perfectly combined by nature. I think this work is beautifully re-exhibited, very powerfully so, by K11 for the City of Hong Kong this year. And, the true kind of master artist Genskin's iconic work has really owned its presence in so many iconic cities, from New York to Paris, now Hong Kong, of course. And this is a city so in need of such a work in difficult geopolitical times and at the heart of a pandemic. I think, the rose in German culture, which is the artist's kind of birth culture, is a sign of romantic intention. In many cultures around the world, it's a sign of love and of hope, and sometimes symbolic even of peace. So again, I think it's great to see that theme coming through. And what better gift to give people right now? For me, it feels like that gesture of hope, and one that certainly soars to defy gravity in the skyline. So that moves us swiftly to Ineke and myself. Weird double moment there. And we give thanks to our entire global curatorial team that we work with, our amazing curatorial colleagues. Together, Ineke and I have nominated a couple of works as well. These are works that captured our individual interest and collective interest, and which impressed us with their meanings and importance and beauty and other aspects.
Kicking off with Ineke Ogbo, This Too Shall Pass. And those who know me know I'm obsessed with sound-based art, and I've been closely following Inike's practice since seeing his work titled The Way Earthly Things Are Going in Athens for Document 14 around 2017. Ineke is a Nigerian artist who explores the complexities of being in our world. And to quote the documenta text, he's interested in the ubiquity of sonority. For example, in the context of Lagos, sound is not only heard, but also seen and felt, determining the pace and texture of the city. What I love about Ogbo's 2021 work, This Too Shall Pass, almost 5 years on from that moment in Athens, is the way it does permeate the entire city of Frankfurt, with not just sound, but interventions scattered and placed across and throughout public spaces as varied as park benches, street lamp poles, and churches. It really truly kind of occupies the city, and it inserts itself within and throughout people's orbit. And I'd really encourage all our listeners to jump onto the web platform created specifically for the work, to spend time with the multi-channel soundscape, which is layers of choirs recorded in Lagos and Frankfurt, resulting in this kind of beautiful composition that melds languages and cultures and asks, in the artist's words, what does singing together mean in our society, especially in a pandemic and crisis-ridden world where music and art per se have long been silenced? This Too Shall Pass further works at eroding misconceptions and social bias against migration, and aims to harness the junction of cultures present in its host city of Frankfurt to spark a discourse around equality and freedom of expression, ultimately agitating for change and this kind of nimble, generous embrace of the other and the unfamiliar.
This too shall pass. It's the very message that I want to hear right now, thinking of our pandemic reality. And it's always good to remind ourselves that time can heal if we just give it time. I think this is, again, another great example of hope and inspiration and a kind of positive undertone amongst a chorus of truth telling. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if that trends into the next year. And of course, it depends what the next year brings. So from that, we'll move to the final nomination. Of course, so many amazing works in the year, but this is our collective selection. This is Sanford Bigger's work, Oracle. And this was cited in New York City and the Rockefeller Center. And it was produced in partnership with the Art Production Fund and Marion Boesky Gallery. And the work was on show from May to July this year, with a slight extension actually in its exhibition period. The Oracle sits tall within the Rockefeller Center, and it firmly positions African cultures and histories in the heart of the city. The work is the latest in a large series of works by the artist called the Chimera series, which explores the amalgamation of both African and European figurative sculptural techniques. The body of the oracle references the temple of Zeus, while the head and the face of the sculpture draw inspiration from Lulwah and Maasai art and sit in conversation with existing works cited around the grounds of the Rockefeller Center, which hold mythological references. The sculpture seeks to examine historical depictions of the body and specifically non-white bodies and challenge stereotypes and contemporary perceptions. A lovely detail of the work is actually a lotus flower motif, which sits along the edge of the seat in which the sculptural body is placed, and each petal features the cross-section of a slave ship, which is a reoccurring symbol in the artist's work. Through the sighting of Oracle and this very highly visible location in the centre, it depicts results itself, the centre of the slave trade, through references to sugar and tobacco. It becomes kind of transformed, and the artist is seeking to prompt discussion beyond the devastation of slavery and to highlight and celebrate African diaspora and the influences they have on the shaping of contemporary New York City. And you can see it's combined with other elements that have shown in the slides, including these beautiful flags which sit around the ice rink, and these depict ocean patterns which further explore notions of diaspora and journey and movement. In vitrines around the plaza, we also see smaller examples of the chimera sculpture and video works as well. Some hot facts: the Oracle stands at 25 feet tall, as they'd say in the States, or 7 meters, as we'd say in Australia, and it weighs 1,500 pounds or 6,803 kilograms. It's seriously massive. I guess my passion for this work lies in the fact that it really evokes, or perhaps provokes, the curiosity of the viewer. It packs a serious punch of aesthetic gravitas simply by way of scale, physical impact, and sighting in this particular location in context. It's also fun to note that the Oracle had an interactive QR code which viewers could engage with and submit questions, and occasionally the Oracle would answer the question with what Biggers described as poetic vagaries. I guess we all want to consult our Oracle moving into next year, but we'll just have to see what 2022 has in store for us.
Life stranger than fiction, basically. What excites me about this work is that it adds to this expanding vocabulary or language of new monumental public sculptures that we've seen growing over the past years. And they're slowly but surely recalibrating those now mostly redundant Confederate and colonial monuments that were entrenched over the past few hundred years across the world, really. And artists like Sanford Biggers are kind of checking the scoreboard and carving out a space that's really rightfully there. So it's really, really amazing to see more commissioning bodies as well, putting the funding and the money behind sculptures like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us to a kind of visual wrap. You can see there a summary of our Best of Public Art 2021 by all of our fabulous contributing curators. We do have a few questions that have come in, so let us just grab those for a second. We're very excited by the engagement that you guys had, so thank you so much for listening and hopefully being inspired. Yeah, go for it. I think so. I feel like you could answer this one.
The question is, public art gives audiences many different emotions. What do you think is the most important feeling or reaction the audience should feel?
My goodness, what a complex question. I think the most important feeling or reaction the audience should feel is their own. I think the wonderful thing about art is artists create this work oftentimes simply for the reason that they must create it to express themselves, and they then gift that to the public or to an audience, and it's really there to experience and to engage with. And I think therefore it's your right to experience that how you see fit. Of course, as curators, we love to tell stories and we love to weave meaning and we find great meaning in things and we share that. But the feelings are your own, I think.
Yeah, and I'd just add, I don't think any feeling or emotion is more important than another. Feel all of them equally. There's no hierarchy, but I guess just to say one of the beauties or one of the great things about public art is that you can feel and observe in a different way to being in a gallery. I know myself, even when I walk past the threshold into a gallery or museum, that there's a performative kind of role that you kind of take on when you're in that space, and you are being watched by invigilators and you're being watched by other people, and you can't get too close, and there is like a performance, I think, that's going on, whereas in the public it's much more relaxed. You can be yourself, you can sit down comfortably or come back and go, or you could have your lunch and just be with the work for a lot longer. And I think that results in a different relationship sometimes, and understanding of a work, and you might see it once and see it again and feel something entirely different. So
it's almost like a right to be there in your own way. Yeah.
Good question.
Great question. Here's another one. This one's quite lengthy. This year's list features a few works that have previously been displayed. Do you think this is because A, the art world is shifting to be more sustainable? Great question. B, these works stand the test of time. C, the pandemic has limited access to new public artworks. D, all of the above. E, something else. Thank you for that question. It's very thorough and I think quite thought-provoking.
I think all of the above for sure, except maybe the sustainability one. It could be a different iteration or edition. Maybe there are multiples of the work. So in that way, you may contributing as much energy use, I suppose, as a new commission. And even if it were the same work, there'd be shipping costs and in-store costs and that sort of thing. But of course, ameliorated and much lesser if the work existed already. And for sure, they stand the test of time. A lot of these works, they wouldn't be shown again if there weren't some measure of appetite by the different commissioning bodies. And I think that's really great. Why shouldn't a public work be considerately cited in another place, just like gallery non-public works are shipped all over the world to be installed in different galleries? They can take on a new meaning in a different site or location or city or culture, which can be really interesting. And maybe, do you want to talk to the pandemic, limited access to new public artworks, or anything else? Or is there something else another reason?
I think all of the above, but I also think in consideration of a couple of the works that have been recited, it's due to the nature of them being quite iconic and being very successful works. And then in some cases, I think it's been about expanding on the idea as well. So I think there are different reasons there. And of course, the pandemic's played a role in that too. When we think of, say, like Suzanne's work at the National Malls, obviously there because of the pandemic, and those two iterations directly link to the pandemic. I'm conscious of time. We've only got a couple of minutes, and I know you're all super busy or possibly want to go to bed. So I thought we might wrap up with a very last question, which kind of is a nice round off. What do you think 2022 will bring for public art? We'll just all consult the oracle quickly. What do we think it will bring?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, it's a big year next year in the Northern Hemisphere, at least, with Documenta 15 and a Venice Biennale. If anything, I think there will be like this craving to get out there more and I guess entice people back out into the communities and into cultural realms. And hopefully it will bring a lot of fabulous new commissions and the funding, I suppose, that backs that up.
Absolutely. I hope for more positivity and inspiration. And I also hope that we continue the sustainable conversation through projects as well, because I think we need to keep that alive. And we saw a lot of energy in the last few years for that, a little bit less this year. On that note, we thank you all so much for tuning in. There's a few questions we haven't answered. We'll email you if we can. And thank you again just for being with us, being a part of this. Thank you to our incredible contributors as well.
Thank you, Artsy, also for being such a fabulous partner. And we look forward to chatting again next year.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Ciao.